This isn't just a plant we're talking about, it's something far deeper. It's a threshold. And most who approach it never realize they're being tested. Society has tried to reduce cannabis into neat little boxes, a medicine to be prescribed, a menace to be feared, a spiritual shortcut, a recreational pastime, even a sacred blessing or a profane escape. But none of those names capture its true nature. They're all attempts to control something that was never meant to be owned. Cannabis doesn't ask you what you believe. It doesn't seek your permission to do its work. What it does is hold up a mirror so clear and so precise that what it reflects can either liberate you or break you. That's what makes it powerful and terrifying. Long before joints were rolled or edibles were baked into brownies, before dispensaries sold strains like candy on digital menus, this plant was something else entirely. It was never meant for the masses. It was entrusted only to those who had prepared for what it could show them. In distant cultures and old mystic traditions, this plant was handled the way one might approach a sleeping lion, with both reverence and caution, not as a shortcut to bliss, but as a portal to the truth, real truth, the kind that doesn't care about your comfort, the kind that burns. The ones who used it were not chasing euphoria. They were seeking death, the kind of death that rips off the ego like dead skin. It was a dissolution, not decoration, the sacred, not spectacle. Now it's different. Now it's content. Now it's lifestyle. Now it's photos on social media, green leaves on t-shirts, a punchline in movies. But once, long ago, it was a bridge between worlds. It required silence, solitude, and often pain. Because transformation is never quiet. In those times, the plant was approached during fasts, amidst prayers, in the heart of darkness when there was nothing left to distract the seeker from their own reflection. In ancient India, for example, cannabis was given to Shiva, not in celebration, but as offering. Shiva, the destroyer, not of life, but of illusion. The one who strips away lies so truth can stand alone. His followers, those wandering ascetics with matted hair and empty hands, didn't inhale to escape. They smoked to confront, to dissolve the self they thought they were. Their pipes weren't accessories, they were weapons aimed inward. In the sacred texts of Taoist philosophy, cannabis was sometimes used with other herbal preparations, not to sedate the senses, but to refine them. It was a substance used to unlock the invisible, to stir the breath, to cultivate the inner silence most people run from. But it was never a casual tool. Those who lacked preparation were warned away, because this plant is not always gentle. It meets you where you are and then pushes. Mystics within the Sufi path, known for their poetry and dance, sometimes used hashish during spiritual gatherings, but even they disagreed on its use. Rumi himself wrote about the difference between intoxication and awakening. He warned that not all highs are holy. Some only mimic what cannot be manufactured. The plant wasn't honored for the sensation. It was respected for what it could destroy. And if you weren't careful, it would cut you in the process. Even in the Caribbean, among the Rasta elders who treat cannabis as ganja, the herb of healing and wisdom, there is discipline. It isn't just smoked and forgotten. It's honored, prayed over, brought into gatherings called reasoning sessions. Spaces where voices rise together, where scripture is spoken aloud, where silence is held with as much reverence as the smoke. The herb wasn't used to forget the world. It was used to remember God. Contrast that with today. You can order weed the same way you order a burger. No ritual, no reverence, no preparation. Just a swipe of a card, a scroll through a screen, and it's yours. It's lit between texts, smoked while binge watching, consumed with no thought of what it was once capable of unlocking. The plant has not changed, but the context has been gutted. When ritual disappears, something sacred dies. Without a vessel to hold the experience, all that's left is raw sensation. And when sensation is all you seek, you slip quietly into indulgence. The danger isn't in the leaves, it's in the way we now ignore the silence they once required. Because cannabis doesn't provide you with answers. It turns up the volume on what's already been playing within you. And if your mind is a storm, the plant is lightning. People enter this temple with dirty feet, expecting peace. They inhale, expecting release, and are shocked when confronted with shadows. But the plant has always been this way. A revealer, a magnifier, a mirror. And mirrors don't lie, they don't soothe, they just show. There are teachings, old ones, hidden in the folds of Hermetic wisdom, Gnostic writings, and obscure mystical lineages. Teachings that cannot be spoken openly because they require readiness, not just curiosity. Some of them we've placed inside our private letters, but even here, even now, a fragment can be shared. The plant doesn't choose your path. It simply reflects the one you're already walking. It doesn't amplify your vibe. It amplifies your alignment. That's why in the old ways, the preparation was everything. The fasting, the cleansing, the sitting in silence until your thoughts unraveled. These weren't superstitions. They were necessities, because you had to empty yourself before the plant could show you what remained. You had to be stable before you expanded. Otherwise, what you meet inside yourself can feel like death. This plant isn't recreational, it's transformational. And transformation never happens without friction. If you're afraid of being undone, this is not your ally. If you seek comfort, you're in the wrong temple. This is why so many today experience paranoia, racing thoughts, dread, or an eerie sensation of being watched. We dismiss these moments as chemical misfires, strain mismatches, or simply bad luck. But what if none of that's true? What if the plant is functioning exactly as it should? What if it's stripping away your filters, not malfunctioning? What if what you're feeling is the raw electricity of your unprocessed mind finally breaking through? Jung called it the shadow, the pieces of your psyche you pretend aren't there, the parts you've hidden, repressed, or buried so deep even you forgot their shape. Cannabis doesn't invent these shadows. It merely removes the veil that kept them hidden. It amplifies what was already playing in your emotional background, and for many, what's playing is unresolved grief, buried shame, or rage never spoken. And here's the part no one markets, because you can't sell discomfort, you can't brand shadow work. It doesn't fit on mood boards or influencer captions, but the truth remains. Real spiritual work starts in the underworld. Not in visions of light, but in wrestling your own darkness. Not in bliss, but in surrender. And cannabis, if you're ready, is a potent guide into that descent. But only if you're willing to look without flinching, only if you're prepared to strip off the mask. In the language of mystical psychology, that unfiltered encounter is not a breakdown. It's a holy beginning. That rising anxiety, that uneasy heartbeat, that sense of being cracked open. It's not failure. It's initiation. When you feel the panic rise after inhaling, when your thoughts spiral and your senses expand beyond comfort, what you're experiencing is the collapse of your ego's control. The internal defense system begins to fail, the mental filters lose coherence, and the ego's walls start to crumble. That disorientation is the raw territory where your real self begins to stir. But in today's culture, there's no map for this terrain, no elder beside you, no guide, no circle, just you, alone in a room with the lights off, drowning in feelings you were never taught to name. And that's the danger, not the plant, but the lack of preparation. You're not going crazy, you're coming undone. And if you're not ready, it can feel like chaos. In ancient esoteric texts, authors like Dion Fortune warned about altered states of consciousness and the porous nature of the subtle body. In these states, you're not just open to insight, you're vulnerable to everything. Energetic noise, interference, echoes from trauma, unhealed wounds, they all rise. Because the plant doesn't discriminate. It invites all of it. And if you respond to that invitation with distraction, if you avoid or suppress what emerges, you fall into the loop, smoke, feel, retreat, repeat, high after high with nothing gained, only the illusion of awakening. Eventually, even that illusion fades, and all you're left with is fog. Cannabis is natural, but that doesn't mean it's harmless. Fire is natural too. And if you light it without containment, it doesn't just warm, it consumes. The plant doesn't care if you're ready. It just opens. What you see, what you feel, what you face, that's on you. Here's where most go wrong. They believe the plan is supposed to make them feel better, that if they don't feel calm, something's wrong. But the truth is, the plant isn't here to comfort you. It's here to show you. Whatever comes, pain, joy, confusion, is information, not punishment, not mistake. It's your own spirit whispering, this needs your attention. But we've been trained to run from discomfort, so we call it a bad trip. We blame the plant, and we miss the entire point. The plant didn't create your fear, it just held it up to your face. And in doing so, it offered you something most avoid their entire lives: honesty. But honesty isn't soft. Truth isn't always gentle. The mirror isn't concerned with how you feel about what you see, it just reflects. And sometimes the image it returns is hard to bear. But that's exactly why the plant was once so revered. Not because it made you feel good, but because it showed you what you most needed to confront. There's a trap, an old one, that fools many seekers: the confusion between sensation and transformation. Cannabis excels at creating rich inner experience. The colors feel deeper, the words feel profound, music becomes divine, your thoughts swim in poetry, synchronicities appear like signs, you journal pages you'd never write sober. It all feels meaningful. But does it change anything? That's the real question. Does your insight lead to new action? Do your realizations shift your behavior? Or are you simply collecting feelings? Sensation without integration is just performance. And cannabis can be the most seductive performance of all. It imitates transcendence, it mimics peace, it puts on the costume of clarity, but imitation is not embodiment. The plant can offer insight, but if you don't bring that insight into your waking life, it evaporates. You mistake the feeling of depth for actual growth. Real growth isn't measured by how profound the high felt. It's measured by what you do after the high is gone. So many who use the plant repeatedly describe flashes of brilliance, moments of emotional clarity, sudden epiphanies, a wash of connection to something larger than themselves. It feels like the curtain has lifted and they're staring directly into the architecture of existence. But that's where the trap deepens. Because a glimpse is not a destination, and a vision is not a transformation. It's not that what you experienced wasn't real. It's that reality doesn't change just because you saw it. You have to change, or it all dissolves into dust. There's a term in ancient esoteric teachings for this trap. It's called spiritual inflation, a swelling of the ego wrapped not in vanity but in insight. You start to feel like you've crossed some invisible line, that you now see what others are blind to. You talk differently, dress differently. You fill your conversations with borrowed words from mystics and metaphysical poets. You start quoting the Buddha, whispering Rumi, referencing energy and light and sacred geometry. But beneath the performance, your life remains untouched, patterns persist, wounds fester, relationships remain shallow or fraught. You feel more, but you live the same. The cannabis hasn't failed you, but the ritual, the practice, the humility, it's gone missing. You're not changed. You're just enchanted by your own reflection. This is what the Hermetic orders once referred to as the false light. It glimmers like enlightenment. It sounds like awakening, but it's hollow. It's the echo of wisdom without the weight of its discipline. In Kabbalistic mysticism, there's a sephira known as Hod, a realm of glittering intellect, of dazzling ideas that lack grounding. It shines brightly, but the light is sterile. It cannot grow roots. That's what happens when cannabis is used to float but not to anchor, when insight becomes a costume, not a commitment. It's why, after months or years of regular use, so many fall into a fog of stagnation. They believe they're evolving, but what they're really doing is circling, collecting feelings, chasing states, like addicts of experience rather than seekers of truth. Osho once warned about this. He said that substances can crack open doors that only silence should open. He wasn't dismissing the power, he was cautioning about its misuse. A door forced open without readiness becomes a distortion, and what enters that door may not be truth, it may be fantasy. The high becomes a pedestal. From it, you look down at the uninitiated, those who've never seen what you've seen. But what have you really seen? Was it truth, or just a chemically induced drama played out in your own mind? Were you really awakened, or just entertained? The difference lies in application. Insight without action is just stimulation. Clarity that doesn't translate into how you respond to criticism, how you love, how you grieve, how you hold pain, how you sit in boredom. That's not clarity, that's decoration. It may feel profound, but it leaves nothing behind when the smoke clears. This is the seduction, feeling something intense and assuming it must be true. But truth, real truth, doesn't just feel good. It reorders your life. It calls you to accountability. It demands change. It burns away pretense. That's the transformation cannabis is capable of catalyzing, but only when it's met with willingness. Because the most dangerous part of this plant isn't what it does to your body. It's what it convinces your soul to believe. That you've arrived, that the work is done, that you've seen the divine and therefore carry it now. But feeling divine doesn't make you divine. Seeing beauty doesn't make you whole. Truth without integration is spiritual illusion. And illusion is harder to escape than ignorance, because it feels like light. You begin to identify with the high. It becomes a pillar of your spiritual identity. You start to feel like the plant is necessary for access to your own depth. Without realizing, dependency sets in. Not chemical, but existential. You believe you can't reach those states without it. You hand over your own sovereignty to a substance meant only to point, not to carry. And that's where the most subtle and dangerous attachment forms. You begin to believe that the magic is in the leaf, that your clarity belongs to the cannabis, that your insight was born in smoke, but it wasn't. It was always in you. The plant only peeled back the layers long enough for you to remember, but remembering isn't becoming. Insight is not transformation. The plant showed you what's possible, but it cannot walk the path for you, and so the real journey begins when you put it down, when you stop reaching for the smoke and start practicing the silence. Can you return to your baseline and still embody what you glimpsed? Can you walk through ordinary days with the same presence? Can you sit in stillness, in boredom, in grief, and still remain awake? This is the unglamorous work, the part nobody posts about. Integration. That's where the real alchemy lives. In how you move when the high is gone. In how you speak to someone who angers you. in how you face uncertainty without reaching for escape, in how you serve when it's inconvenient, in how you forgive when it would be easier to walk away. That's where the plant becomes more than a high. It becomes a teacher, not by giving you more highs, but by daring you to live what it showed you, to become what you felt. That's not found in euphoria, that's found in repetition, in showing up differently again and again until what was once a fleeting insight becomes the foundation of your life. Cannabis touches more than neurons. It speaks to the subtle body, the energetic blueprint beneath your skin. It activates that inner realm of feelings, patterns, memories, and vibrations. You can't see it, but you can feel its shifts. And the plant, when introduced, stirs everything. When your energy is clear and your intention strong, cannabis can feel like music, like resonance, like being tuned. But when your field is muddy, when emotions are stuck and mental patterns are chaotic, the plant doesn't clean that up. It turns up the volume. Suddenly the noise is louder, the discomfort sharper, and you confuse that chaos for malfunction. But the plant isn't broken. It's just amplifying what's already broken in you. Think of your subtle body like a violin. If it's well tuned, the bow of cannabis can produce a hum of harmony, even stillness. But if the strings are tight with old trauma, out of tune from stress, caked in dust from emotional neglect, all the bow will draw out is dissonance. Not because of the bow, but because of the instrument. And yet, in our culture, we don't speak of energetic hygiene. We don't cleanse before we consume. We don't prepare. We reach for the herb like we reach for coffee, or snacks, or screens, thoughtlessly, reactively, carelessly. But the ancient ones knew better. They fasted before ceremony. They bathed in cold water. They chanted. They wept. They prayed. They aligned their breath. Not as superstition, but as preparation. They were tuning the instrument before striking the first chord. They were cleaning the vessel before receiving the sacred. In traditions like Reiki or subtle energy healing, cannabis is often called a field disruptor, not because it's dark, but because it's strong. It opens you wide, sometimes before you're ready. That openness can be a blessing or a breach. If your nervous system isn't grounded, the surge of sensitivity becomes unbearable. You lose focus, your awareness fragments, the channel is open, but it has no filter. Everything floods in. The same is true in Kundalini practices. Cannabis can awaken energy at the base of the spine, stirring dormant currents, and it feels exhilarating, electric, until it doesn't, until the current rushes beyond your capacity, until you crash, are unable to process what's been stirred. There's a reason ancient systems had stages, initiations, practices. They didn't fear energy. They respected it. In Amazonian and African shamanic traditions, every plant is seen as a consciousness, a being, not a thing. When you ingest it, you're not just taking a substance, you're inviting in a spirit. That spirit speaks, not with words, but with impressions, memories, visions. And if your field is cluttered, that spirit can't speak clearly. The message gets distorted. Insight becomes confusion. And that's why so many feel drained, dull, or disoriented after frequent use. Not because the plant harms, but because they never clean the space before opening the door. It's like trying to listen to sacred music while standing in a traffic jam. You'll hear something, but it won't be the song. The more often you do this, enter sacred space without reverence, the more you dull your own perception. The nervous system numbs, the sensitivity erodes, and what once felt alive now just feels foggy. Because cannabis without containment becomes chaos. It spreads like fire. When the room is clean, it warms and illuminates. But when the room is filled with flammable junk, old stories, broken beliefs, unresolved trauma, It burns, and then you blame the flame when really it was the room that needed clearing. You begin to confuse this dull haze for peace. You mistake numbness for clarity. But real healing doesn't feel like sedation. It feels like power returning to the body. It feels like awareness rising. Healing doesn't lull, it awakens. Cannabis, when misused, can become a mask, not a medicine. It covers the symptom instead of revealing the root. But when used with awareness, it becomes the scalpel, cutting deep, exposing the infection, daring you to heal it. That's the difference between suppression and transformation. And so the question stands, have you done the work? Have you cleaned the temple before inviting the spirit in? Because cannabis doesn't scrub the floors of your psyche. It just turns on the lights. What you see is what was already there. We used to wait until we were ready. Now we smoke because the weekend came. We've replaced intention with impulse, ceremony with convenience. We took what was sacred and turned it into a product. Sleek packaging, mood-enhancing playlists, hashtags and infographics. The plant hasn't lost its power, but we've lost our ability to hold it. There was a time when cannabis wasn't something you reached for in private. It wasn't a solitary escape. It was something shared, held in ceremony, framed by silence and shaped by purpose. In sacred cultures where its spirit was truly honored, the herb was never passed without intention. It moved clockwise like the sun across the sky, like the hands of time, like the pulse of life itself. It was blessed, it was spoken to, and it was never lit in absence of a question. Among the Rastafari, ganja was more than herb. It was language, it was presence, it was prayer. It was passed hand to hand during reasoning sessions, gatherings of deep dialogue where each puff was followed not by laughter but by reflection. The smoke rose with scripture, poetry, chant. The rhythm of drums echoed the heartbeat of the earth, and each voice carried the vibration of searching, of aligning, of remembering the divine. No one smoked to get away. They smoked to come home, to jar, to source, to the sacred within. And the herb wasn't something casual. It was a living ally. You didn't smoke it to forget your burdens. You smoked it to meet them honestly, to shed the mask, to make peace with your truth. Even in traditions where cannabis wasn't the central medicine, like among the Afro-Brazilian religions of Candomblé or Umbanda, the principle was the same. Plants had spirits, frequencies, a sacred geometry. To misuse a plant was to disturb your own field. To take it lightly was to invite imbalance. In those traditions, you didn't just consume, you entered relationship. You approached with humility, because plants didn't serve you. They challenged you. They measured you. And in these traditions, nothing sacred was ever taken without first preparing the space, physically, emotionally, spiritually. The ground had to be cleared. The mind had to be clean. The ego had to step back. Otherwise, what could have healed would only confuse. What could have illuminated would only distort. But ritual is inconvenient. It requires time, stillness, patience. And the modern world doesn't sell patience. It sells speed. It sells novelty. It sells simplicity. So the plant was stripped from its roots, rebranded for mass consumption, sanitized of its mystery, and repackaged into something that fits into your lifestyle without requiring any change from you. Now you can pick up an eighth like you pick up a latte. You can scroll a website, tap a strain, and have it delivered in 30 minutes. No fasting, no silence, no preparation. Just click, light, and float. And what was once a portal becomes a product. Now cannabis is branded with pastel fonts and faux Zen taglines. It's sold next to crystal bracelets and lavender bath bombs. Influencers pose beside it. Playlists are curated for it. And the deeper power of the plant is buried under hashtags, incense, and performative spirituality. Even events that claim to be sacred, festivals filled with chakra flags and ecstatic beats, reduce the herb to background noise. The ritual becomes a costume. The ceremony becomes a performance. The plant becomes an accessory. Its essence, that fierce, untamed spirit, is drowned in aesthetics. But cannabis doesn't care about your branding. It doesn't care if you call yourself conscious. It doesn't respond to how many likes your ritual gets. It responds to energy, to presence, to sincerity. And if there's no container for it, no structure, no boundary, no silence, it doesn't pause. It simply flows. It fills the cracks in your attention. It amplifies your addictions. It rides your anxiety. Because the herb has always done one thing: magnify. And what it magnifies depends entirely on the vessel receiving it. This is why some people light up and feel inspired, and others sink into a fog of confusion. Same plant, different readiness. When we abandon the ritual, we abandon the compass. And without a compass, you drift. You chase the high, you lose the meaning, you consume experience but digest none of it. You begin to confuse repetition for growth. You feel altered, but you live the same. The issue was never the herb. It was the absence of sacred space. Because it was never the plant alone that carried power. It was the container, the circle, the silence, the intention. When those were in place, the plant acted as catalyst, as amplifier, as gatekeeper. But now, in isolation, without those anchors, cannabis becomes ungrounded light. It creates openings with no guardians, insights with no mirrors, expansion with no integration. And that's where the real danger begins, not in physical harm, but in spiritual disorientation. You start to believe that because you felt something profound, it must be true. But not everything that feels real is truth. Not every high is healing. Not every insight is wisdom. Sometimes it's just projection. Sometimes it's your wound dressing itself up in mystical language. This is what discernment is for. In Greek philosophy, the word was krino, the sacred ability to separate signal from noise. In Vedanta, it was viveka, the razor of perception that distinguishes what is eternal from what is illusion. It's not skepticism, it's maturity, the willingness to interrogate even your most beautiful revelations. And without that blade of discernment, you are not awakening. You're just building a temple out of your fantasies. Cannabis can create the sensation of awakening. It can give you poetry. It can flood your mind with archetypes, symbols, visions, ideas. But the question is, do they hold under pressure? Do they remain when you return to sobriety? Do they make you kinder? Do they help you navigate heartbreak? Do they help you stand in silence when accused? Do they help you love your shadow? Because if your visions don't change how you walk through conflict, how you serve others, how you hold your wounds, they're not visions, they're dreams. And that's the painful truth most won't face, that sometimes the plant is not showing you the divine. Sometimes it's showing you your delusion. And you're so hungry to feel special that you mistake the echo for the source. You think you've tapped into the mystery, when all you've done is amplify your story. This is why the circle was always essential, because in the circle, illusion has less room to grow. You can't pretend you've arrived when others hold your reflection. You can't perform awakening when the container is real. You're seen, you're held, you're heard, you're accountable. And it's in that space, between voices, between drags, between beats, that something real can happen. Not performance, not aesthetics, but actual transformation. The kind that doesn't end when the smoke clears. Because the circle does what the plant alone cannot. It helps you calibrate. It helps you interpret It helps you remember that your experience is not just yours. It belongs to the collective. You are responsible for what you saw. You are tasked with what you received. In those old circles, whether in the hills of Jamaica, the forests of the Amazon, the deserts of North Africa, or the temples of Asia, people didn't just consume. They listened. They waited. They allowed the silence to speak louder than the substance. Even now, in modern cities, that kind of space can be created. A few trusted friends, a clear intention, phones turned off, a candle lit, a vow of honesty, a moment of stillness before and after. No selfies, no shows, just presence, just reverence. Because the container doesn't need to be ancient. It needs to be authentic. The plant demands structure, because its power, like any fire, will either warm or destroy depending on how it's held. And without a vessel, that fire wanders. It leaks into your trauma, into your self-deception, into your need for validation. It burns through what isn't anchored. And that includes your sense of self. And that's when people spiral, not because they took too much, but because they took it too lightly. So maybe the question isn't what strain you're smoking. Maybe it's who are you smoking with, not just physically, but energetically. Are you surrounded by mirrors or by echoes? Are you being witnessed or enabled? Because without that sacred context, cannabis stops being a teacher. It becomes an entertainer, and what once had the power to show you truth becomes another way to avoid it. There comes a moment in every seeker's path where the novelty wears off, the highs become familiar, the insights begin to repeat, the same feelings cycle through, and it starts to feel like you're walking in circles. That's when the real work begins. That's when intensity must give way to clarity, when you stop chasing the sensation and start asking what it was pointing to. This is the pivot, from experience to embodiment, because cannabis can open doors. That's not the hard part. The hard part is walking through them. The hard part is integrating what you saw into how you live, how you love, how you serve. That's what most avoid, because it's not flashy, it's not mystical, it's not Instagram worthy, it's just effort. But that effort is the measure of truth. You begin to realize that the point isn't to stay high. The point is to remain awake when you're low. The discipline isn't in lighting the herb. It's in what you do once the smoke fades. Can you remain present when your nerves fray? Can you choose honesty when lying would feel easier? Can you offer grace when you're hurting? That's what cannabis was always meant to support. Not escape, but embodiment, not performance, but presence, not revelation, but responsibility. It's not the vision that makes you wise, it's how you carry it into traffic, into arguments, into heartbreak, how you use it when no one is clapping. That's the test, that's the graduation, that's the fire turned into form. Because if you stay in the vision, if you live only in the high, if you depend on the smoke to feel depth, you haven't awakened. You've just found a softer prison. Cannabis is not your salvation. It's not your source of wisdom. It's a mirror, a very honest one. And the moment you forget that, the moment you give it more power than it deserves, you lose your center. But if you remember, if you use it like a compass, not a crutch, then something remarkable can happen. You begin to walk differently. You begin to listen more deeply. You begin to speak with precision. You begin to love with less need. And that's where the plant becomes legacy, not because of what it gave you, but because of how you honored what it revealed. There comes a point in every real journey when you stop asking what else the medicine can show you and start asking what it expects from you now. The experience, no matter how profound, is not the prize. the way you carry it into your ordinary life. That's the alchemy. It's never been about what you see when the world drops away. It's about how you behave when it doesn't. Cannabis, in its truest form, was never meant to be something you orbit. It was meant to open something ancient inside you, and then step aside. The plant was never meant to be your destination. It was your signpost, your mirror, your key. The test isn't whether you can feel the sacred. The test is whether you can live it, in the grind, in the repetition, in the mess of relationships, conflict, stillness, and time. What good is feeling oneness if it doesn't change the way you treat someone who triggers you? What is the point of all that insight if your kindness still depends on your mood? If your clarity disappears the moment discomfort walks in the door? We were never meant to worship the doorway. We were meant to walk through it. But too many now stay at the threshold, intoxicated by the glow of temporary depth. They confuse that glow for transformation, not realizing they're repeating the same stories inside a more poetic container. The same fears, now narrated with prettier words. The same wounds, now dressed in symbols. But nothing's shifted. It's all still orbiting the ego. And here's where the ancient lineages drew a hard line. At some point, the tool must be set down, the flame must be passed back, the ceremony must end, and the sacred must be lived. That's when the real work begins, not in smoke or sensation, but in the morning after, in your breath, in your posture, in your gaze when no one's looking. Integration isn't something that happens automatically. It must be chosen again and again, and most won't. Because it's not romantic, it doesn't shimmer, it doesn't buzz, it doesn't entertain, it just asks you to show up. The plant showed you something, yes, but what you do with that vision, that's your responsibility now. And this is where sovereignty returns. You remember that the power was never in the substance, it was in your capacity to receive, to witness, to respond, that sacred presence you felt. It was never in the leaf, it was in you. The plant simply helped you notice, and when you realize that deeply, fully, you begin to let go, not in rejection, but in reverence. You don't need the mirror anymore because now you're watching yourself. You don't need the opening because now you're wide on your own. You stop asking the plant to hold your hand and you start walking alone, rooted in everything it showed you. That's the silent graduation the mystics spoke of, the moment when the tool becomes unnecessary. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded, because you remembered who you were before you ever needed it. And that remembrance, that returning, that self-reclamation is the real awakening. But this moment only arrives if you're willing to be honest, truly honest. Are you still using the plant because it teaches you, or because it makes you feel something? Are you leaning on it to deepen, or to avoid the shallows? Do you still reach for it because you want to grow, or because you've grown attached to how it makes you feel? This is the question many avoid, because the answer requires humility. And humility is the soil of all true growth. The ego loves the high. It loves how spiritual it makes you feel. It loves the language, the symbols, the illusions of progress. It loves the performance, but it resists the discipline, the accountability, the truth. The truth that sometimes what you're chasing isn't transformation, it's anesthesia. You're not growing, you're numbing. And cannabis is just your latest disguise. And the only way through that is to pause, to put it down, to sit in your own sober stillness and ask, is peace still here? Is presence still with me? Can I find truth without help? Because that's the measure. Not what you see when you're altered, but what you carry when you're not. That's where the plant becomes a legacy, not a crutch, not a trend, not an identity, a legacy. It shaped you, not because you kept using it, but because at some point you let it go. The sacred was never in the consumption, it was in the transformation. And transformation doesn't happen in a single night. It happens every day, in how you speak, in how you forgive, in how you listen, especially when you want to defend, in how you hold your center in chaos. That's the teaching cannabis always carried. But most weren't ready to hear it. Because hearing it means letting go of the illusion that healing is supposed to feel good. It means accepting that clarity often arrives through discomfort, that growth rarely comes with applause, and that wisdom doesn't always glow, it humbles. The ancient ones never glorified the plant. They respected it. They never saw it as the answer, only as a doorway to a deeper question. Who am I when nothing else remains? When the stories fall away, when the ego dissolves, who stands in the silence? That question still waits for every seeker, and cannabis, when used with integrity, can guide you to the edge of it, but it cannot answer it for you. That part is yours, always has been. It's you who must stand in the valley. It's you who must speak with the shadow. It's you who must rise every morning and choose to live aligned without needing the spark of a plant to remember what matters. That's how you honor the teacher, not by repeating the lesson, but by embodying it. You begin to understand that it was never about the high, it was about the remembering. And that remembering must now turn into becoming. You take what was once temporary, a flash of insight, a wave of compassion, a glimpse of stillness, and you build your life around it. You structure your relationships around it. You rebuild your habits to reflect it. You live differently. You serve more clearly. You listen more softly. And you love without needing to perform. Because the plant wasn't showing you something new. It was showing you what had been buried under noise, under identity, under fear. And now it's uncovered. Now it's yours. And so the circle closes, the smoke fades, the room returns, the body settles, but something in you remains awake, clear, honest, ready. Because you've remembered that everything the plant ever gave you was yours all along. It didn't invent your depth. It didn't manufacture your peace. It simply revealed what you already carried. And now you carry it with you, in your voice, in your gaze, in the way you hold space for others, in the way you walk through this complicated, beautiful world with grace. That's the legacy of a sacred plant, not a trend, not a brand, a passage. You stepped in as a seeker. You leave as a student of your own truth. There are no fireworks, no angels, no chant echoing into the heavens. Just breathe, just body, just life. And that's more than enough, because you're no longer chasing the sacred, you're living it. And the plant, it bows silently, as teachers do when their lesson is complete. So if you've made it this far, through the high, through the unraveling, through the silence, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready to stop asking the plant for answers and start becoming one. Not to others, not to the world, but to yourself. Because the sacred doesn't live in the substance. It lives in you, always has. And the question now is simple. Will you live like it?